everybody? Welcome to another episode of Purple Insider presented by FanDuel. Matthew Coller here, and what a day in the National Football League. Who knew that June 1st would suddenly turn into an NFL holiday? But it seems like now that there's trades all the time. And Adam Schefter pointed this out, just how many Pro Bowlers have been traded in recent years. And now the teams use that June 1st designation pretty often. I guess it is. So we're going to have to make sure that I don't have any plans for June 1st for the rest of the existence of the NFL, because what a day in the league. There's an emergency podcast you could go watch breaking down Myles Garrett to the Rams. We could talk about it here tonight in the comment section as well. And also A.J. Brown, the trade that everybody knew was coming for a very long time, became official, and the Vikings made their general manager hire official, and they got some money to work with. And we're going to look at how the Vikings might distribute their salary cap space and also how much more they are capable of creating if they want to do that, or if they are maybe deterred at all by some of today's news with the Los Angeles Rams being insanely stacked with Myles Garrett. So we can get into that. Before we dive into the Vikings, Nolan Teasley's hire becoming official and so forth, I do want to start out the show by saying some news has just come out within the last few hours that Larry Fitzgerald Sr., who is Larry Fitzgerald Jr.'s father and has been an institution in the Minnesota media, has passed away at the age of 71. And for the last, 10 years or so, Larry has been there all the time in the Minnesota Vikings media room. He's been on road games, home games. I've seen and been around Larry all the time for the last decade, and it's very sad that he passed away. I know that he had been dealing with some health issues for the last couple of years, and Larry always wanted to talk sports with anybody who was there, very enthusiastic about the NFL, Minnesota sports, and somebody whose coverage of Minnesota sports went back almost 50 years, which is really incredible to think about. There's a photo of him in the press conference room interviewing Denny Green. His son tweeted out a photo of him interviewing Randy Moss. So those of you who have followed Minnesota sports know Larry Fitzgerald Sr., and I'm really heartbroken for his family and for especially Larry, who's going into the Hall of Fame, but at least his father got to see him be named to the Hall of Fame, but not in order to see him go into Canton. So very sad that he will be doing that with a heavy heart later on this year. But, Larry was always there, always wanted to talk about football, sports. But my favorite thing about Larry Fitzgerald was that one time, a few years back, my wife was working for WCCO Radio before she went into doing full-time play-by-play. And so she was covering a Vikings game, even though she doesn't cover a lot of Minnesota Vikings and didn't with CCL, but she did that one day. And she sat next to Larry, and throughout the game, they chatted for the entire game, and Larry was so nice to my wife. And then every time I would see him anywhere, if I was at a different game, if I was in a press box, whatever, Larry would ask me, what's your wife doing? What game is she calling? He would see her doing Gopher games. So always very, very kind to me during our time together. So I'm extremely sad for his family, for Larry Fitzgerald, and he will be greatly missed by the Minnesota sports scene, of which he covered for decades and decades and decades. So my best and condolences to his family. So we'll get into it here. Lots of things to talk about, but the comment section wide open for whatever you would like to discuss here tonight on this NFL holiday, June 1st. But I want to begin with Nolan Teasley's hire becoming official. Of course, we knew about this on Saturday when Tom Pelissero and others broke the news that the Seattle Seahawks assistant general manager would become the next general manager of the Minnesota Vikings. And the Vikings released statements today, and he will be officially announced to us and hold his first ever press conference with the Minnesota media at 10 o'clock on Wednesday. So I'm sure some of you will tune into that. But of course, I will be there. and we'll do a post press conference podcast breaking down everything that Nolan Teasley had to say. So make sure you look forward to that on Wednesday. And I'm not sure which day is going to be open to OTAs. It wasn't today, but we'll see. But of course, we'll be at the next OTA practice as well. But there was something that stood out from the official press release about Nolan Teasley's hire, which is the sentence that I have pulled here on the screen. Putting Nolan together with Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski gives us three strong leaders with complementary skill sets, is what Mark Wilf said in the release. And the other day when I was doing the breaking news podcast, I didn't know what they were going to do with Rob Brzezinski yet at that point. So that was one of the questions that we were all asking is, okay, well, is Rob going to be changing title, or is he going to go back to his old title, or is he going to, I don't know, take his abacus and go home and do the salary cap by himself? We didn't really know what Rob was going to do. So then it was shortly after the podcast was over that I think Jonathan Jones of CBS reported that Rob Brzezinski was going to stay with the same title that he had before, which was Executive Vice President Football Operations. But previously, it seemed like his main focus was the salary cap and contract negotiations. And with something like this, it feels like, and it will be a question, I'm sure, to Nolan Teasley or whoever talks. I'm not sure if Mark Wilf is going to take any questions, but maybe Nolan Teasley about, is this going to be a triangle of authority with Rob Brzezinski? Because this statement, and I'll show you another one that kind of hints at this, feels like it is kind of a triangle of authority type situation. Now that gets made fun of because of its past for the Vikings. But if this does turn out to be kind of the case, and we may not ever really know, they don't have to come out and release a flow chart and say, this is how the power structure is working, just in case anybody wants to know, it is this guy's fault. If this happens, it's that guy's fault. This guy has final. They never got into that with Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, and they're not going to get into it with us. But I think that the suggestion here is that Rob Brzezinski is very, very strong on the asset management side, the salary cap side, and did a really good job of setting them up for the salary cap future. And then you have Nolan Teasley, whose player evaluation, not just his own, but he was in a management position in Seattle where he was overseeing a lot of different stuff when it came to the player evaluation, including all the research and the data and analytics stuff. He was overseeing that, as well as all of the scouting stuff as well. And John Schneider is at the top of the food chain there, but he was doing a lot of that stuff in Seattle. So the player evaluation side, the salary cap and asset management side, together with the coach, it does seem like the three of them are being asked by ownership to work very closely together. And while it may not be a president of football operations, and it is probably, if I had to guess, I would say the general manager is going to have final say, because Mark Wilf did tell me and the other 5 reporters who were there at the owners' meetings, Kevin Seifert, Emily Leiker, Dane Mizutani, Alec Lewis, all of us, when we sat with Mark Wilf, he did say that we're not going to add new titles, like we're not going to add a new structure. And in the past, the structure has always been that the GM has the final say. But Nolan Teasley, is part of his job is to work with Kevin O'Connell and Brian Flores closely. You could say maybe rectangle of authority. I don't know how much Matt Daniels has to say. Maybe it's a quadrilateral. I have no idea. But when it comes to O'Connell, it's very important that someone who has established their culture, their way of playing, Brian Flores, his defensive culture, his way of playing, that they have a very close relationship with the GM. But it's also important that at the end of the day, we're able to say, this was Nolan Teasley's plan and it was executed in his way. And I think that Brzezinski being there with his experience and his ability with the salary cap and with asset management is very good for the Vikings. And I think that Vikings fans and us got a look at Rob and that being his superpower and the way he handled things this offseason. So here is what both Kevin O'Connell and Rob Brzezinski had to say about the hiring of Nolan Teasley. I'll start with O'Connell, who said, throughout this process, it became clear Nolan is a strong leader with a great vision for building and sustaining a winning football team. He carries himself with humility, but can confidently articulate the impressive depth of his football knowledge. We share a belief in the importance of culture, consensus building, and putting people in positions to become the best versions of themselves. I look forward to working alongside Nolan and Rob as we continue building on the foundation that we've established and strive to achieve our goal of bringing a Super Bowl to Vikings fans. So once again, another mention of Rob Brzezinski is part of a trio. Maybe that's what they'll go with. The authority tricycle is what we have here. And maybe Teasley is the front wheel that steers it. I don't know if that metaphor actually works. But Rob Brzezinski said in his statement, this organization means so much to me and my family, and I take tremendous pride in being a part of the Minnesota Vikings. I have a great deal of respect for Nolan and look forward to partnering with him, Kevin, and our entire football operation to build the best team possible. I will continue to do everything I can to help this organization achieve its ultimate goal of bringing a championship to Minnesota. So once again, I look forward to partnering with Nolan and Kevin. And Kevin also mentioning Nolan and Rob. Are you getting the hint here that it seems like the three of them working together? But to me, this is a bunch of very good skill sets that combine together to have a little bit more of a unique leadership than they've had in the recent past. With Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah, it was kind of hard to figure out exactly who was making the calls because, I mean, every time I hear it said that the Vikings previously had an analytical front office, I go, I can much easier point to the things that the Seattle Seahawks did way easier and say that's analytics than I can the Minnesota Vikings over the last 5 years. Easily. Because you can look at the draft picks and the production from the draft picks, the athletic markers from the draft picks, how many draft picks they accumulated. That's all stuff that usually connects back to data, how they drafted versus consensus boards. It hasn't always been right dead on. It's not like the computers and AI are doing the drafting, but you can see where there's a connection. And you can also see from their spending, like how they were able to create cap space for themselves, despite the fact that they were paying a quarterback, and how they were able to turn over rosters, and their pro personnel decisions were, well, I'm sure they didn't say, let's do the analytics, but they bought low on some really talented players, which would be a concept that would go back to, hey, this has a good chance to work. That's, well, maybe a little bit of Sam Darnold, but it's DeMarcus Lawrence, it's Leonard Williams. They were able to find guys like that. And I think another thing is finding middle and later round draft picks who worked out. They did a really good job of that. So maybe you could point at that. If that was Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah's drafting, you would have said, look how the analytics are working. I can check off every box. But instead, the guy's a scout. So, it doesn't get viewed the same way. But anyhow, that's a side rant because we always got to have everything that was the opposite of the last guy. But if the last guy knew every analytic in the book and couldn't get consensus and couldn't get buy-in from the coach and the front office and didn't build the credibility with ownership to win certain battles or whatever it might have been to get people behind him and agreeing on certain directions, well, then doesn't mean a thing if you know how to code or if you know how to build a model. It really doesn't. So I think with Nolan Teasley, he's seen this work really well. He has taken the long road to the position he's in and now is in a spot where he has some people around him that he's going to have to work closely with. But I think in Brzezinski's case, you really saw the talent that he has for understanding the assets, the cap space, and the draft picks. And I think it's all going to come together with them putting a much more emphasis on protecting those things because those are your dollars and cents, right? That's your money to go out and spend is cap space and draft picks. So doing it in free agency all the time, not having one form of capital and only having the other, it's hard to build a team long-term with that. So I like that idea. I advocated for Rob to have a continued position of power because I think he brings a lot of credibility and a lot of respect in the building. And then I also think that sometimes the scout folks and the coaches, they want to push for stuff. They want to push for moves. They want to push for the win now stuff. And you need someone to be able to say, this is the best long-term approach for how we can compete every year. And it was remarkable when I was looking back at the Seattle Seahawks and the success that they had over many, many years. I mean, this is what the Wilfs want, right? It's never really a tear down. They did manage themselves into a couple of top 10 draft picks, one in a Russell Wilson trade. Smart asset management, though, moving on from a depreciating asset and getting top dollar for it in Seattle. But they also were competitive even when their teams were not the best, 9 or 10 wins. And then when it all came together, they won a Super Bowl. So I like the idea of the triangle structure, even though it's going to be probably made fun of. And I'm super interested to hear what Nolan Teasley has to say about it, about working with Kevin O'Connell, about his journey to the highest position that you can get in the NFL and general manager. So I'll be very fascinated to hear what he has to say on Wednesday. All right, if you guys haven't celebrated yet in the streets, feel free to run outside right now, keep your phone and keep watching or listening. The Vikings have cap space. They have not had a whole heck of a lot of it in quite some time. And finally, the Jonathan Allen and actually Harrison Smith's contract come off of the books in the post June 1st designations, and the Vikings are up to $12.5 million in cap space, which is still 21st in the league. And there are other teams who have a lot more cap space than the Vikings to make big moves, but I do have some takeaways from the Vikings finally having some dollar bills in their pocket to potentially spend post June 1st. Number one is, if Harrison Smith was going to return, because we've talked about this a lot, hey, is Harry coming back? What's going to happen there? We haven't heard from him. Nobody knows. Well, if he's going to come back, you need to be able to sign him to a contract, and you need cap space in order to do that. Now, yes, he could have announced, hey, I'll be back in minicamp or something else like that, but why would you ruin the fun? I do wonder, though, from Harrison Smith's perspective, if it matters how much the Vikings would be able to pay him. Now, I know you might say, oh, who cares? He's made his money or whatever. But I don't know. I'm more motivated by things that pay me more money. I think with the amount of money that they would pay Harrison Smith if he came back, it is a little bit complicated when you base it on comparable players. So I was looking today, most of the top safeties in the NFL that are not the Derwin James, because I think Harrison even himself would say, hey, that's the cream of the crop in 2026, not 2017. But, Harrison still is a very good safety. I mean, even if you go PFF route and look at what their numbers say about his performance in recent years, easily top half of the league safety. And then we know about the things that you can't calculate, which is the communication, the leadership out there, the, defensive coordinator on the field, all that stuff, and his meaning to the younger players in the locker room and et cetera, et cetera. We know all that, but how much is that really worth? And the answer that I came to is one that I'm not sure Harrison would come back for, which is Kevin Byard, who had a great season last year at age 33, got $7 million from the New England Patriots. And I mean, I don't know how you could go much higher than like 10, which is where Harrison Smith was. And then because it's going to be a 1-year contract, are you putting voids on it? Are you kicking money down the road? So even though we just sort of think of, well, if Harry wants to come back, he'll come back. And this is great. It will probably take up a chunk of this cap space. So if they don't spend it on Harrison Smith's return, where else might they spend it? Free agent outside linebacker depth is the number one pick for me. I've mentioned on the show that Leonard Floyd would be the guy I would be trying to go after because he was still effective last year for the Atlanta Falcons. And I do wonder if the Vikings, I know they don't play the Rams this year, but if you look at kind of the arms race and go, maybe another veteran at the outside linebacker position, if they weren't already headed in that direction, is going to be necessary if you're going to go into the playoffs and beat some of these teams that are very strong top to bottom. And Floyd would be my pick there. Somebody mentioned to me that Omar Kelly, I think of the covers the Miami Dolphins, that he said that Kyle Van Noy and Brian Flores kind of ended on some bad terms, but maybe that won't matter years later. I really don't know. He's also a free agent. Those are the two names that I've been looking at the most. There's a couple other experienced guys out there that the Vikings could look at, but also if they didn't, backup offensive guard, interior offensive line, Graham Glasgow is out there, who played for the Detroit Lions over the last couple of years. Not great, but was a serviceable starter. Greg Van Rotten is another guy who kind of is a free agent every single year and somebody picks him up, but maybe there's something there for the depth if they don't love what they see going forward. But I also think they could wait and see, which is just watch how training camp plays out. And what we know is that players will become available again at the end of training camp. If they're beaten out by younger players or teams are just cutting someone to keep somebody that they think can grow and develop or whatever it may be. Somebody is unhappy with their contract and it goes into the summer. Hard to say. But if Harrison doesn't return and they don't run to the free agent market for an outside linebacker, and they maybe rather say, let's see how this works out. And there was a small hint. I didn't really mention this because we were so deep into the JJ McCarthy stuff. There was a little bit of a hint, and I don't know if it's just because who was available for practice or not, of Ty Ingram Dawkins playing outside linebacker. So that could be interesting if you had, Tyler Batty and Ty Ingram Dawkins kind of playing that outside. Bo Richter has established himself as a special teamer. Is there something else there? Chaz Chambliss, like maybe just throwing like in the Batman where you just break the pool stick and throw it and say, whatever outside linebacker emerges, you got the job. I mean, I don't love that for right now. I think they could use one more veteran, but wait and see is a potential option to just not spend any of this cap space when Nolan Teasley arrives. Let him evaluate the entire roster first, and then make your decision. And I started looking into how much more salary cap space they could create if they absolutely needed to. And I came up with, and this would be every restructure that they could still do, an extra $35 million if they needed to. So were there a big trade that they wanted to do, then they could probably make it happen. They would just have to restructure a couple of more players. So the Vikings now have cash, and we will see what they do with it, which, of course, you could jump in the comment section. What should they do? Should they wait and see? Should they jump to free agency? If Nolan Teasley was asking you, what would you tell him to do with the cap space right now? A couple other notes. One, I wanted to point this out. Albert Breer was on the Dan Patrick Show, and I'm always paying a lot of attention to Albert Breer. I think of all the national people around the NFL, Breer is among the most dialed into the Minnesota Vikings, the one who kind of gets it right as much as anybody. And he said this of the quarterback competition. He said on the Dan Patrick Show, the roster needs to win now. It's no one's on scholarship anymore. His being McCarthy's draft status doesn't matter. Whoever is the best player for us to win right now is who Kevin O'Connell is going to pick. And I wanted to mention that there was some very fascinating fallout from the analysis of all of us coming out of OTAs, because if you Googled Minnesota Vikings, which I tend to do every day just to see if I missed anything or for topics or whatever else, there was this person addresses McCarthy's comments, that person addresses McCarthy's comments. And I think that a lot of our critique for the way that McCarthy approached his press conference the other day was kind of based on that, right? It was something that didn't have to be a story. It didn't have to be all eyes are now talking about this situation because of the way you handle the press conference. And he made it about that. And he made it clear how unhappy he is to be in that competition when that just didn't have to rock the boat from day one. And it turned into, hey, a late May topic that kind of has some juice to it because the backup quarterback's not too happy or the young quarterback's not too happy with the new quarterback being here. And it was a feast over the following days of every ex-player that they could dig up, every reporter they could dig up. And if he had just said, yeah, I'm going to do the best for the team and happy that Kyler's here, it would not have made that kind of noise really at all. Now, does that matter? Maybe if you say no, okay, well, then maybe it doesn't. But it could have been avoided, that discussion. But then I saw that Kevin Seifert called it not close with the practice between the two and how they performed, which also kind of lit up the internet as well. Now, I would agree with Kevin's assessment of the actual practice. We only saw one. It's only one OTA practice, so the competition is not all completely resolved just yet after that practice, but I would agree. And we'll have to see just how we come out of this next week of OTAs, and really minicamp is where I've, in my time covering the team, put a little more emphasis on how it looks. Like they've had a couple of weeks to install. They do a little more 11 on 11, a little more full speed stuff in minicamp. So I'll be interested to see how the distribution goes for that. And, I don't know that we're going to hear from the quarterbacks again, maybe at the very end. I think we usually do that at the very end, OTAs, minicamp, that we may hear from them again and what that sounds like. But just kind of interesting to gauge the reaction from the national side is basically a lot of the same stuff that we've been saying. But this in particular was pointing to, it doesn't matter about who has potential. It is time to win football games. And that is what they're going to do with whoever it takes to do it. The next thing I wanted to bring up is if you guys have reaction to the Jared Verse and Myles Garrett trade. I did an entire podcast with Sam Brookhouse, which I really enjoyed earlier today, breaking it down the minute it happened. I got to say, it feels very even to me. And I've been fascinated from a numbers perspective because we really didn't dive super deep into this, but from a numbers perspective of Jared Verse as a guy who can pressure the quarterback but doesn't get a heck of a lot of sacks versus Myles Garrett, who gets an ungodly amount of sacks. I'm interested to know what you guys think, because the line moved to plus 550 for the Rams to win the Super Bowl. And I made a little milkshake bet with Sam Brookhouse at the end of our show. I said, hey, Rams or the field. So that's the FanDuel question of the day for today. They're plus 550 to now win the Super Bowl. That's way ahead of Buffalo at plus 1,000, Baltimore at plus 1,000. Rams or the field to win the Super Bowl. Which way would you go on that after this trade? I honestly think that the Browns made out pretty darn well here. A young pass rusher, 3 draft picks over the next 3 years. And, you don't really want to think too much about this from a Vikings perspective, because Justin Jefferson seems perfectly happy in Minnesota right now as we speak. And he's got a quarterback that is accurate, and we're going to see where that goes. And he's not a guy that you would think about trading because he's one of the best in the entire league. But we would have said that for Myles Garrett. It just feels like players are getting traded more often than ever based on timelines. And I am a little bit curious to see if there are more of these. I mean, I'm not saying Jefferson would be that, but there is a scenario, the absolute disaster, everything goes wrong for the Minnesota Vikings and Jefferson decides that he wants out, that is real. And if you look at the way his contract is set up, it's set up to redo his deal after this year, to give him an extension. And if he doesn't want to do that, then things get very, very interesting. And it came to mind today, if the Cleveland Browns are going to trade one of their all-time great players, you never know who could be the next man out in the NFL. And the next man out, A.J. Brown, a very unhappy camper over the last couple of years. And A.J. Brown finally traded in what we can call I'm going to call it the Rossini trade, because this was one broken by a former NFL insider for reasons that we all know by now many weeks ago. And yet it finally came to fruition. But the price tag here was what I was thinking about, just with these are huge name players, foundational players, a Super Bowl winning wide receiver. And he goes for a first round pick in 2028 and a 2027 fifth round pick over to the New England Patriots. So a first and a fifth for A.J. Brown. And what we see here is that the teams that were trading this disgruntled players, they ultimately did very well in their trades. So read into that, what you will, but now Philadelphia will lean on Mekhi Lemon, which is ironic because Mekhi Lemon is the guy that the Rams probably should have drafted if they were doing this all in, chips to the middle of the table. And I did want to say that moves like this are absolutely great for entertainment. And I respect the teams. Now, we've talked about this of understanding your moment Like, was last year really the Vikings moment when they knew nothing about JJ McCarthy? Probably not, right? It proved out to be not. But even then, from a logic perspective, yes, you can understand it. Rookie quarterback contract, you're taking full advantage. But I think in hindsight, they clearly missed the mark on when they really should have been pushing the chips to the middle of the table in their Super Bowl window. So what these teams have done well, Philadelphia historically and the Rams incredibly well, is when they have sensed the moment, they have really, really gone for it. And I respect that Kwesi did, and Kevin O'Connell and whoever else was involved in moving on from Sam Darnold. I do respect that last year the Vikings attempted to sort of do this with all of the money that they spent and all the guys that they retained and everything else, because as often as it comes up with the Wilfs, they're not willing to tank. They always want to be competitive and everything else. You can never say that they're not the team at the front of the line trying to do something like this, that they're trying as best they can to win, but picking the right moment. Nolan Teasley, it will be an enormous thing for him that likely determines success, is picking the moment to get a player like this, because now they're coming available all the time. And the other thing that it made me think was there might be other quarterbacks available next year other than Kyler Murray. And I'm interested to see that, because it just seems that quarterbacks are available every offseason and that stars are available every offseason. So picking that moment, when is it right to spend first round draft picks? I can tell you this, it's not 2027 for the Minnesota Vikings. It wasn't right now for the Vikings, but it will be someday if they build correctly. And that's the idea with Teasley, is can you put yourself in a position at some point within the next couple years to be the team that trades for A.J. Brown or be the team that trades for Myles Garrett and pushes the chips to the middle of the table. So a fascinating, fascinating day in the National Football League. Now let's get into the chat and let's have a fun conversation. My wife is calling Lynx and Phoenix Mercury at 9. So guess what? We've got until 9. Plenty of time for all of you with your questions and your comments. So let's dive right in. Jude says, do you think Verse is worth the draft picks, a first, third, and a fifth maybe? Jared Verse is a very, very good player. I don't think that he's going to get much better because he is an older player, but he is still inexperienced. And the Browns did really well in this. If you have to get rid of Myles Garrett, who is outside of quarterbacks, a top 3 player of a generation, top 5 player of a generation, if you have to get rid of that player, getting back someone who's young, powerful, creates a lot of pressure, might have some more sacks in there, and then 3 draft picks is about as good as you could get. It's also why the Rams were likely the only team that could make this happen, because, I mean, were the Vikings getting Myles Garrett for Dallas Turner or Jonathan Grenard and a couple of draft picks? Like, probably not, right? You needed someone who had been excellent when it came to creating pressure, a starter, someone who was healthy. I mean, they had to check a lot of boxes and still give up a first round draft pick. I mean, this is one where it's an even trade. This is Jefferson for Diggs. This feels very even. It feels like perfect for both teams. And, Joker says, I don't know what Verse is supposed to do for the Browns. How does he fit in their timeline? Well, their plan is to build the best young team through the draft that they can, which I think they've been drafting fairly well, around a absolute garbage fire of a quarterback situation, and then presumably draft Arch Manning or, whoever it might be. I don't know the 2027 draft class inside and out yet, but whoever emerges to draft the quarterback, then have a young Jared Verse. And even if you pay Verse, they're probably looking to have a quarterback on the rookie contract. So you have the rookie quarterback, then Jared Verse. You've built a lot of different draft picks. Mason Graham is another top draft pick. They traded down with Jacksonville, which that trade now looks kind of insane for Jacksonville if Travis Hunter's more of a one-dimensional player. And then you build from there. And what we've seen from tanking teams is that if you hit the nail on the head, it doesn't take that long to bounce back up to the top, which is the Chicago Bears, the Detroit Lions right here in the division. So I think it works out extremely well from a timeline perspective, because Verse could be good for another 7 years. So you start there, and then you get more draft capital, and you're trying to build in hopes that, I mean, truly the best thing for them would be that Deshaun Watson and Shedeur Sanders just are terrible, and they end up drafting at the very top again and then building from there. And you could say, well, haven't the Browns done that many times? The answer would be yes. So I get your point, but what other direction would they possibly have? They could also be in a spot where if someone else's quarterback became available, then they could acquire that player with a bunch of guys on rookie contracts. It's just getting someone to go to Cleveland is not always the easiest thing in the entire universe. Purple Kool-Aid said Verse is young and they're rebuilding him and Mason Graham and Malik Collins on their line. Plus they shed a huge amount of money. They nailed that trade. Totally agree. I think that the Browns, the thing is that their organization has been such a bus fire and their quarterback situation has been so hysterical for all of its history that even when they do smart things, you're like, oh, stop it, Browns, you silly gooses. You're never going to win. But I think we have to evaluate it objectively with each move. And in this case, this is good for them. This is good because Myles Garrett fits within the Rams timeline. They're trying to win today and tomorrow, and that's it. But someday, not that long from now, Myles Garrett will decline, and it's not that long from now where he probably will over the next couple of seasons, right? I mean, that's just how it works historically. So from the Browns' perspective, you'd rather have someone fairly comparable. I mean, no one's really comparable to Garrett, but at least in his range, at least he's in the stadium with Myles Garrett, and then several draft picks to build around over a number of years rather than wasting away an unhappy Myles Garrett this year, and then we'll see about next year. Like, they're really looking at like a 2028, which they'll have to pay Verse, but still, you're looking at that guy to be on your team for a very long time. Joker said, is this roster good enough to go full Rams? Are we aiming for ethical, humiliating divisional round loss if we don't go full Rams? In what way could the Vikings go full Rams that would make any amount of sense? If they traded Dallas Turner and a first and a second and a third for Myles Garrett, that would be amazing. And maybe at that point they would have some chance to be better, but are they complete enough to do it? There would have to be a little bit more there. I think what the Vikings are looking to do this year is to see where this goes. And then maybe there is a full Rams moment. I mean, look at the Rams. There's no guarantee here. What if they start the first 5 weeks of the season, they're 5-0, and then Matthew Stafford breaks his hand and it's Ty Simpson's show and they're kind of out of the running to be the Super Bowl champion. Everybody else is pretty flat, pretty close to each other, right? The Seattle Seahawks are good, but they're going to have the Rams in the division. That's not a happy thing, I'm sure, for Sam Darnold, is seeing ghosts just getting hit by Myles Garrett this year. But when it comes to Seattle, they're really good. It's very hard to repeat. And San Francisco, they're very good. They've got flaws. They're aged. They have a lot of guys coming off injuries. Detroit is good. They're not perfect. Green Bay is perfect. Green Bay is not perfect. They're going to be good. They're going to get Micah Parsons back, but they're not perfect. And Chicago is probably going to regress a little. And even if Caleb Williams is better, they still have some shortcomings. Dallas, Philadelphia. Philly is probably the third strongest team in the NFC, but last year they struggled offensively, and now you're asking a rookie to go be A.J. Brown, and you can't always do it. So I think with the Vikings, you have to see where it goes. If Kyler Murray is 6-2 and you've outscored your opponents by 70 points over the first 8 weeks of the season, then maybe there is a moment where you say, you know what, let's just go for it. But if you're going to build longer term through the draft, it's not something you should probably do. I mean, trading for TJ Hawkinson overall, I think worked out pretty well for the Vikings, but that was out of this roster's coming apart. We've got to take our shot at it. We got to make this big trade for him. And then it ends up costing you not only the draft capital, but the cap space as well. I think with Brzezinski where he's at, and with Nolan Teasley and the desire to build through the draft, and he was a pro personnel person too, but building through the draft is really the focus here. that I don't think going full Rams is appropriate at this moment. And someday after you've built through the draft, it will be. But maybe we haven't seen it yet. When we actually see it, I mean, imagine that Caleb Banks is like amazing right away. And he's got 7 sacks through the first, I don't know, like whatever it might be, right? And their defense is just nasty and Jefferson's crushing it. There might be a situation where you decide, all right, you know what? We're going to take a swing at it, as opposed to doing it right now where I think there's still so much that's uncertain. Scamping around, I don't like the Garrett trade. Not great for us, except the other NFC North team that plays. Are there 2 teams that play them or just one? Is it just no? Who would it be? Is it just Green Bay? Is Green Bay the only team that plays the Rams? I mean, where it's not great for the Vikings, no, because if you play them in the playoffs and it's Myles Garrett and it's Byron Young and it's Kobe Turner and McDuffie and oh my gosh, like they have just put so much talent together on the defensive side. And I really feel like this is where the NFC is being won a lot of the times with a lot of good quarterbacks. It's can you block for them and can you give them a defense? And the teams that have been able to block for their quarterbacks and have a run game to support them have won the Super Bowl the last 2 years, Philadelphia and the Seattle Seahawks. So, can the Vikings run? Can they block for Kyler Murray? Can they play elite defense? Well, I think we know that the Rams and Kyron Williams and Blake Corum really ran exceptionally well last year. I think we know that they can check all of those boxes. It really comes down to, do all of these players come together, or is there injuries, or is there maybe Stafford regression because the guy is very old now at this point? He's coming off an MVP season, but we saw Rodgers go from MVP in 2021 to, what's happening with Aaron Rodgers in 2022? From 21 to 22, MVP to, it's not that great. So you don't know when it comes to older quarterbacks when it's going to fall off. But if you're doing this today, and you're looking at the FanDuel odds going plus 550 to win the Super Bowl is kind of crazy. They are the favorite going into the season by far. Purple Kool-Aid, Howie Roseman traded a first for Brown, got him for his prime, then flipped him for a first and a fifth. I wonder how other GMs even pick up the phone. He is playing a different game than everybody else. You are absolutely right. And replacing him with a really good prospect that dropped in the draft in Mekhi Lemon, but is very talented. You're right. Philadelphia. And these 2 teams, like what a great day to make this point, right? Like those 2 teams in the NFC are the teams that you can clearly point to and say best front offices in the NFL, Philadelphia and Los Angeles. Their management of what they have, as you're talking about, a declining asset, but a desperate team in New England. So, hey, New England let go of Stephon Diggs. We better go trade for A.J. Brown, and we're going to give you a first-round draft pick for it. Seems very desperate of a New England Patriots team that got to the Super Bowl last year, but then moved on from Stephon Diggs for, I don't know, Stephon Diggs-related reasons. So you end up with giving up a first-rounder. You're replacing someone who might, at this point in their careers, Diggs was really good. A.J. Brown might be that good. If he's better, I'd be a little surprised than Diggs was last year. And the AFC, Mahomes is coming back. Lamar's got a new coach. You have Josh Allen still in the mix. The Houston Texans. The AFC is pretty freaking nasty. So it doesn't feel the best for New England to have to give up that much. When you break this down, it feels a little crazy how if you just compare, and I'm not saying this is fair at all because A.J. Brown's had a great career, but Jawan Jennings' production over the last 2 years for $9 million versus A.J. Brown for a first-round draft pick and his salary, I don't know. It's not even really close. From those two, from the production that Jawan has given. And I'm not saying they're the same receiver, but nothing is done in a bubble in the NFL. It's always, this is the worth of the asset that you have. And I know they're human beings and we talk about them that way, but at the end of the day, that's the economics play for front offices. So for Howie Roseman, yes, to make a trade for Brown in his prime, bring him in, use up all of his prime, swing him for a first round draft pick and replace him with somebody that is way, way cheaper is a hell of a job. And what you want people to say about Nolan Teasley, like, this is your goal, Nolan Teasley. Your goal is to have people like us talking about the team going, I don't know how he did it. He did it again. He managed the heck out of that situation again. Did you feel like that during Kwesi Dafo-Mensah? Maybe a couple times. Did you feel like that with Rick Spielman? Maybe a couple times. With Philadelphia and Los Angeles, you feel that way all the time. Yeah, I definitely do not think that A.J. Brown was worth a first round draft pick. Purple Kool-Aid, do you think another team may look at Brzezinski next year if there's an opening? I can't see that. I think Rob Brzezinski's a Viking for life. That's how, I mean, if I'm another team and maybe over the years he's had this opportunity, I would love to have Rob Brzezinski in my front office. But in terms of, do I think he's going to leave for another position? No, I would be really, really shocked if that happened. Steve says, Mr. Coller might ask Teasley on Wednesday during the press conference about who has final say over the 53-man roster. Someone will. I'm not probably going to waste my question if I get the opportunity on that. But you know what? I'll probably ask, and you guys are going to be shocked by this, but I probably will ask about the management and overseeing of the research and analytics department as well as scouting and how they utilized all those things together. Well, probably no one can prepare for that now, that if Purple Insider asks the question, and there's a lot of media at these things, so sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But if that happens, that'll likely be my question. Someone will ask about the 53 and the final say. You know what they'll respond with is, well, you know, we're all working together and collaborating. So if I'm getting one, I'm probably not asking that one. But you never know. That's fair enough. The Pentagon of Power. The rhombus of rightness. I like that. That's good. Steven says Seattle got worse over the last couple of days, losing Teasley and having to deal with Myles Garrett. That's, you know, the thing about winning the Super Bowl is it's so crazy. And it's why I love football so much. But it also, if you think about it too much, have you ever had a word get stuck in your head and you say it a couple times and then you don't know if it's a word anymore? That's like when you try to figure out how to win the Super Bowl, where you just end up getting completely mind boggled by the Seattle Seahawks last year. Were this close to not having home field advantage, but then they did. And they probably would have less wanted to play the Philadelphia Eagles, who I think were a stronger defense, to go out and face them. But they end up with the 49ers, who had just lost George Kittle to an Achilles and played a nightmarishly physical game all the way across the country. And then in the NFC Championship, which was really the Super Bowl, Sam Darnold, of course, played like a maniac in that game. It was peak Sam Darnold. He never has to apologize for that. But they are one Matthew Stafford pass away from maybe the Rams winning that Super Bowl. And if they don't win it, if the Seahawks don't win it and the Rams go win it, and then they trade for Myles Garrett, you'd be sitting there going, we lost our offensive coordinator, we lost our AGM, we lost defensive talent, and now the Rams are better. So that's why it's so hard to do 2 times in a row. It's also why those Vikings losses in the past are so devastating, because you guys know this as much as anyone, is every single thing has to come together, and it usually doesn't have lightning strike twice. Axton says, I found it interesting that Mark Wilf did not include Brian Flores. Yeah, I guess a little bit. Me too. The head coach, though, is no matter who it is over the entire NFL, is in that's the front door of your franchise person, is the head coach. So it would be very, very rare if you looped in a defensive coordinator into the decision-making process in terms of giving them a level of power. But I mean, this team has done that, and Brian Flores has had that, his say is really important, and it should be. But in terms of the actual decision-making, I think what they're making clear here, and maybe we will get more details on how the interactions, maybe not the final say, but how the interactions are supposed to go, is it's not going to be a defensive coordinator. Like there's no team in the league where you would have a defensive coordinator or offensive coordinator that are officially in on the decision-making process. That is because Brian Flores works for Kevin O'Connell. Kevin O'Connell's at the top. Flores is his defensive coordinator. And if he wants Flores to not be his defensive coordinator, he can do that, right? So not that he would, but like that's his authority, his power. If you're making some sort of flow chart, you're going to have the general manager at the very top. And I assume that Rob Brzezinski is answering to him in the way that this has worked before. And Kevin O'Connell is answering directly to ownership. Teasley is answering directly to ownership. And the three of them are supposed to work together. Now, it means a lot to Kevin O'Connell what Brian Flores has to say. But it also, for Nolan Teasley, if Brian Flores comes in and says, I want Jonathan Allen on a $20 million contract, you're supposed to be the one that can say no and have the credibility in the room for everyone to say, all right, well, that's his call and he's making it. That's how it would usually work there. Triumvirate, trapezoid, tripod. I like that. Hexagon of heroic football strategies, a little much. Triangles are a tripping hazard. Okay. The Eiffel Tower of effectiveness. Well, you guys really got into your bag here in the comment section. Steven says, today was the most exciting June 1st of the recent past. Garrett and AJ Brown trades. Oh, that's right. I mean, I didn't even mention that OBJ is back as a New York Giant. Great point, Steven, and Juju Smith-Schuster as well. So that kind of tells you again about, getting Juwan Jennings and why it was a good thing, because Smith-Schuster has been not great for a while. OBJ, I'm good. No thanks on that. So you're right, though. All sorts of movement going on. And let's not forget, Steven, $12.5 million in cap space dropped into the Vikings. Joker, who is delegating Rob's responsibilities, the Wilfs or Teasley? This makes it sound like the Wilfs. I would guess that it would be the Wilfs who would be saying, these are your jobs and this is your level of authority for Rob Brzezinski. I mean, I don't know how it's going to work in terms of if there is a massive disagreement. I want to sign Kyler. You don't want to sign Kyler. Who ends up winning out? I tend to think, though, and I've said this before because I stole it from Sam Monson, who's going to come on the show tomorrow, by the way. Sam Monson of Check the Mic podcast, formerly PFF, he one time said on his podcast that players number 2 through 53 are the GM and the head coach, and player number 1, the ownership is involved, and that's the quarterback. So what they do next at quarterback, the ownership will definitely be involved. But the way that it has generally worked, the way it was explained to me, and I assume it's going to be similar to this, is the GM and coach answer to the owners. And when there are different directions and decisions that have to be made, and this is why I will always say, I don't care who said keep Darnold, who said get rid of Darnold. At the end of the day, the franchise let go of Darnold, and he embarrassed them by winning the Super Bowl, and JJ McCarthy is fighting for QB2. So at the end of the day, I don't know who said what and who wanted what, but they're all responsible. Everyone who was there, everyone, even if you were against letting Darnold go, you didn't make a good enough case. So anyway, but from what I've understood is that when there are big decisions to be made, directions to be laid out, the general manager and the coach are going to present their ideas and what the franchise wants to do from the front office and from everyone having all their meetings and everything else. I guess the question is, when they have those meetings, when they get on Zoom, it sounds like it's Rob and Kevin and Nolan all having those conversations with ownership, which overall I like. They believe in Rob Brzezinski. They know what he's done for this franchise over many, many years. They trust him. Having his voice in those discussions, I think overall is a good thing. The Lance says, hope there's not too many cooks in the kitchen. Yeah, I mean, like there's 3, not like 37. But these 3, but they're in very different spots though. Teasley's the new general manager, so it's new ideas that he's bringing in. Kevin O'Connell has known ownership for a good amount of time. They know how he operates. And of course they trust Brzezinski. So they're in a little bit of, different spots there. Steven, are Grigson's days numbered as assistant GM? You got to think Teasley may have other people in mind to bring in as his right-hand man. I would expect that he will bring in his own assistant general manager. It would be very, very surprising to me because even Kwesi had his own assistant general managers with Ryan Grigson and Demetrius Washington. So my expectation is that he will get to select his own assistant general managers, and they will answer to him the way that he answered to John Schneider, and they will manage a lot of different elements of the front office the way that Nolan Teasley was. So those hires, well, we have a tough time figuring them out, like what they do on a day-to-day basis from the outside. They're usually considered to be very important. I definitely think if you're hired as a GM, a big part of the conversation with the owners is who do you want to bring with you? Who are you taking from Seattle? And there's a couple folks who have been considered risers in their front office that might end up in Minnesota. And I'd like to see that as well, that, bring in people who have a fresh perspective on this front office and want to run things the way that Seattle has. That has been a very successful model out there for a very long time. Joker, ideally, Nolan strongly listens to Rob for his asset management skills, and Nolan delegates any non-team building nonsense to Rob or others. When you're talking, I was telling the story about Rick Spielman and the ad sign on the training kit. Every GM has to deal with that stuff, man. Like that's just not, that's not uncommon at all because you're managing an entire building. Did you guys ever see the show? Was it called Las Vegas? Many years ago, there was a show called Las Vegas, which I think did a really good job of showing how much stuff happens in a single casino that the management has to deal with every day. That's like a football franchise. Every single day, there's fires to put out. There's people that you have to talk with. There's vendors that you have to talk with. And not just like advertising with you, but your Pro Football Focus and your data and your all sorts of different things that you have to deal with. There's coaches. There's also, it's not just sitting in a room. When we all think we could do it, we all think we could do it with a PFF subscription and RAS scores and stuff like that. And you know what? You can get really far with that stuff, but it doesn't work that way. And of course, I've always wondered to myself, like, what if it did? What if a team was entirely run, an NFL team, in terms of all of its roster decisions by one guy? What if it was just Nolan Teasley himself alone in a room with a computer and he could watch as much tape as he wanted, but he had no other responsibilities? It was just you make every single roster move. Like, how would he do? I think in terms of the logistics of actually signing players and everything else, getting players onboarded, bringing them into the franchise, all that a person couldn't do. But a really sharp person, I wouldn't be shocked if they would do just as well as a huge group. But there's also an idea in, like wisdom in crowds, right? If you have a group of people who are very good at what they do and they're all working together, that they'll come to the right answers. So that's a lot of the idea. And it's really much more corporate structure than people understand. Purple Kool-Aid Von Miller keeps insisting he wants to play. I'm not into that. Not into that idea. Okay, that's the one. AJ Epinesa. Yep, he had some flashes. Purple Kool-Aid. He had some flashes in Buffalo. I don't know if it fits with the outside linebacker or, maybe it does if they were looking for someone to be the pure rusher. Hassan Reddick. I don't know if does it. It's felt like at times, maybe it was just the Jets. Maybe the Jets people make you crazy, but that Hassan Reddick has been a little bit erratic at times. Might still have something in the tank. Didn't love what I saw from him from a numbers perspective as much as I liked Leonard Floyd, but maybe he's the kind of guy. So they're out there. Mama, love you some Bo Richter. Did a story on Bo Richter a couple years ago. Very interesting guy and a way better athlete than people understand. There might be something there, but I think if you're relying on that, then that's where it could be tough if he has to play a lot. Purple Kool-Aid, if you could trade for anyone, who would it be? Realistically, like anyone in the entire league, I think the guy was just acquired today. That's the thing about this trade is truly this is one of those, these people never get traded. Myles Garrett, and actually Max Crosby also got traded. Myles Garrett is on a totally different Hall of Fame, all-time great player. I think for me, it would probably be Patrick Surtain. Not that that's that realistic, but the number one freak corner does not exist that much in the NFL. Maybe it never did, but maybe guys just got interceptions and got labeled that in the past when I was growing up. But maybe it's also because teams play so much zone coverage now that there's less of this, I'm going to be the shutdown. Receivers are moving all the time. But that guy is so freaking valuable to the Denver Broncos. If you could just sort of pluck one guy off another team, it might be him. It also might be like whoever we're considering. Well, no, Jason Kelsey's not in the league anymore. Landon Dickerson, whoever the best center in the league is it Landon Dickerson? I'll also take him because I think center is the most underappreciated position in the NFL. Very, very hard to replace. Matt, when's the next camp available to the media? I do not know that yet. I'll have to, let me check my email to see. Usually we find out a couple of days before. Oh, well, look at that. I am not kidding. I did not even see this email and now I just did. So we're going to find out together. That would be, let's see, Thursday at 10:35 in the morning. That's unusual, a little earlier in the morning than normal. So there you go. On Thursday at 10:35 in the morning, I'll be out there at TCO Performance Center to watch a practice, and then I'll have a write-up, and obviously we will have a podcast breaking it down as well. Matt Verick, with the cap space, I would wait until closer to training camp to sign a veteran pass rusher, then hold on to the rest and see what else is needed during training camp. I like that idea. I like the wait and see. I have no issue whatsoever with that. They waited and saw on Stephon Gilmore, and that turned out to be great for them because sometimes somebody does just wait because they don't really feel like coming to training camp. Some veteran players, that might be Kyle Van Noy, it might be Leonard Floyd, where they figure I played so much football, I could just sort of pop in. And it worked for Gilmore. He played almost every snap in week one. Or sometimes you get into a training camp and there's just a situation where a team maybe didn't expect a certain player to emerge, or there's a disagreement on a situation with their contract or whatever it might be. And they just go, you know what? All right, we're just going to trade you. And then, maybe the Vikings are sitting there because they have cap space at that point. We do see that type of stuff every once in a while where players who are not maybe even necessarily expected on the market or kind of out there for a long time suddenly get traded at the end of training camp. And for whatever reason, the one that's coming to mind is Chris Herndon. I know that didn't work out, but it's that kind of trade where Chris Herndon had been a proven player for the Jets and they had a younger guy that they wanted to give the job. They were kind of rebuilding. So the Vikings trade for Chris Herndon, and it turns out to be one of the worst trades they've ever made. So don't make that again. Magyar says trade for Josh Sweat. I would be curious to know what Arizona is asking for Josh Sweat. He is a successful pass rusher with the Philadelphia Eagles. He goes to Arizona and is forgotten about like any other person who goes to Arizona. But is that the type of player that you'd like to trade for? Yeah, I think that it is. Now, how much? That's the problem. Because what I don't want to see, and this is where I'm bouncing back and forth. I know Joker has been banging this drum of like, why not get Dexter Lawrence? Why not trade for this guy or that guy and really go all in with this year? Because if you look a year down the road, there's many questions about this roster. And I totally get that. But I also think it's what they've been doing forever. It is sort of, our roster's a little on the older side. Now we have to absolutely make this big move. We got to make this big trade to win right now. And then if you come up short in the playoffs, you look around and go, well, now what? And you don't want to be in that position. Now, if Josh Sweat is available for a third-round draft pick and they have an extra third-rounder next year, then maybe you would say, all right, let's do it. But you also have to be mindful of the salary cap situation as well. The best way to build this team, I think hands down, is if Kyler Murray is really good and he can set a floor for your offense, and then you just draft on the defensive side. And what you hope for is a Seattle Seahawks or a Los Angeles Rams situation where you look around, you go, yeah, they drafted almost everybody. And then when you get there and you get those players on the rise and they're developing and so forth, then you say, all right, now it's time to make that big trade. But if it's a fairly cheap deal, then, there's no issue with that. Joker can't think of any reason not to grab the extra $35 million and go full Rams. Yeah, I know that you've been in on that. But the thing is, one, it's got to be out there for you. Like, who are you going? Josh Sweat, to me, is not worth spending a ton on. I think that's a type of player that you can get in free agency or the draft. He's good, but we're not talking about a Myles Garrett or a Jared Verse here where it's a top-notch player. And the reason is that if you move $35 million to make cap space now, the trouble is that it will cost you later on. You have to pay it back. It's just moving money. It doesn't make it go vanish and disappear, but you can if you need to. If all of a sudden Myles Garrett was coming here, they could go, all right, we're restructuring this, and this, and off we go. But that's not where they're at right now. And there has to be someone that you could actually make a trade for that would be worth that much, because there's no one in free agency. So who would it be that you could actually make a trade for that is disgruntled or with another team and you could have for multiple years? Because I think that's really important too. If you're making a full all-in type of trade, well, if you're the Vikings, you kind of need that over multiple years. I see them as being a highly competitive team that if they turn out to be great, then you make that type of move. And Son of Beaver says, check in on Max Crosby. I think that's reasonable to check in on Max Crosby and see where they're at. But they got 2 firsts for him the first time, and he's got a knee issue. Like, these are the moves that they scream to me. You make this big, exciting move, and then we go, yeah, that was great, but did it really get you as far as you were thinking, right? So purple Kool-Aid for the Rams makes sense. You have a Hall of Fame quarterback on his way out, right? Right. Joker, after thinking about McCarthy's comments, I don't think he gets it. I think I was right last year when called him a performative male quarterback. Joker, you live up to your name, my friend. Every night you make me laugh with something that you say in the comment section. I don't like to try to get inside guys' heads like that of, is this performative? Is this genuine? Is this and this? Because I don't know what JJ McCarthy was thinking. If I had to guess, I think he was thinking, I'm very annoyed with all these media people who are asking me about a quarterback competition after 1 year ago. He was the darling, probably annoyed that, and I heard something from Sam Darnold the other day that was quite interesting, where he was referencing how hard it is to face the criticism. And he sort of said, if you're a young quarterback and you see a comment on, a YouTube clip or whatever else, like, it could get inside your head or whatever. And I thought, is he talking about somebody else that maybe some of this stuff has gotten inside his head? I don't know. It also came across as being ticked off at the team. When you say the organization, when you never mention Kevin O'Connell, when you talk about, hey, it's the coach's job, not Josh McCown, Wes Phillips, just the coaches. Like, when you're saying it, it's very coldly. It sort of makes you seem like you're separating yourself from the team right there. That was the interpretation. But what he was actually going for, I don't know, because he may have just been going for, I'm going to present to the world that I want this competition and I got a chip on my shoulder, and it may have come across differently, but definitely did not hit the mark with those comments. And you saw a lot of people discussing that across the NFL in the couple of days after. Evan says, so Myles Garrett probably would have cost us Dallas and 2 firsts at least. And I think that's exactly what you said. We talked about it a while ago. Did we talk about it? Did someone ask me? There's a lot of questions. I don't remember all of them. Did someone ask what it would take? I probably did say that. You know what? That sounds familiar, of like Dallas Turner and 2 first-round draft picks. I would not do that. Even though Myles Garrett is a gazillion % worth it, you don't get 22-year-old Myles Garrett. So I'd much prefer have 3 players as opposed to just hoping that one of them, who is an all-time great legend, absolute, like, peak top level all-time great player, but you are still putting all of your eggs in one guy's basket. And I think that even some of that for Dexter Lawrence in the trade that they got, I mean, you could have had Caleb Downs and then all that cap space. And I'd probably, and I am the biggest Dexter Lawrence is a freak enjoyer. Love watching the guy play football. I think he's incredibly dominant. Interior, defensive line, guys who create pressure. It's such a problem and everything else. But I don't know that Dexter Lawrence is worth, what we're talking about, like for Caleb Downs, where they could have had him and whatever amount of cap space. That's always the question, right? I'd probably rather have 2 more years of cheap Dallas Turner and 2 first-round draft picks than I would have a late-stage Myles Garrett. But that's really dicey. That's really tricky. Now, if you told me that Kyler Murray was going to be a top 5 quarterback, my mind has changed. Because Matthew Stafford last year is a top 5 quarterback. He's a top 1 quarterback in the NFL. So they know that that's possible. That's why these decisions and these all-in moves for the Vikings are down the road for them. Because if Murray turns out, top 5 is maybe rich, but if he turns out to be a top 10 quarterback, then you are in a position where, yes, if you sense the moment, you feel like, hey, this is our time, then yes, all right, you go for it, but you got to have really the roster to go for it to where even if it doesn't work, you're still going to be in good shape. And with this, I mean, it's almost impossible that it would not work. But if Myles Garrett got hurt, they still have another year at least of Stafford. He got an extension. They still have another year of Myles Garrett. So it doesn't immediately blow up in your face. And they also have a foundation of a lot of really good players and cap space to come, I guess, down the road if they don't extend certain people. But, I think that with the Vikings, if you can make an all-in move that's not going to be a train wreck toward your future, and you can justify it with your quarterback is X good, not just one good year, but your quarterback is X good and your rest of your roster is on the younger side, that's when you really want to do stuff like this. That's why Seattle did a great job with Leonard Williams. And that, like, Leonard Williams is a monster. He's not quite Myles Garrett, but he is an absolute monster. And they make the trade for him in Seattle when they had a lot of draft picks that are coming in and performing well, and they had future draft capital and everything else, and they could make a move like that. That's kind of a luxury move, and a couple years into, and a multi-year type move, and a couple years into it, they win the Super Bowl. Purple Kool-Aid kind of shocked the NFL didn't go Chris Paul to the Lakers and veto it for competition purposes. Yeah, I mean, look, the best team doesn't always win in the NFL, so we'll see there. The Lang says McVay is going to retire, so he's disposing of their future. I could really see it. I truly could. That if you're Sean McVay, especially if you're not really sold on Ty Simpson or there's not an obvious other answer, that you could say, look, I won a Super Bowl. We went for it. Maybe they win one this year. But even if they don't, at the end of Matthew Stafford just saying, all right, it's probably not going to get much better than that. But not all NFL people think that way. They don't always just say, well, all right, I've had enough. I'm going to retire. And in the NBA, okay, I coached LeBron. We won. I'm going to retire. That doesn't happen. Like Spoelstra didn't retire after LeBron. So McVay might just keep coaching and coaching and coaching forever and say, look, if I could do it with Goff, get to a Super Bowl, if I could win one with Stafford, I can do it again. And maybe they'll do that. I don't know. Orion says Broncos Vikings 2027 Super Bowl. 2027 will be very fascinating. I've been thinking about it a lot because, Nolan Teasley's really starting with 2027 in his mind. I mean, yes, right away, extensions, what to do with the cap space, free agency. Like, you got to get into the job and really assess this thing pretty quickly and listen to your coaches and listen to Rob Brzezinski and maybe make some moves for this thing on the immediate. But there's not like earth-shifting moves that you're making right away. You're really starting your focus on who do I want to be here long-term? And then you're evaluating slowly, which I think is a legitimate advantage for him to be able to get his first true offseason many months from now, where he can do his own assessments and evaluations on everybody. And then even like the entire front office. I know that the chat always wants everyone fired, so they want all the scouts and everything else fired. But this gives Nolan Teasley a long period of time to evaluate how everyone works together, and then next year can make decisions on, do you want to change out everything? I mean, anything that you're talking about, whether it's players, front office, whatever. So I think it helps for him to be able to see it all and then decide, are you close in 2027, or should you do some sort of a teardown? Who should you keep around? Who should you restructure? And that, I think that's easier to be able to do with a year in your pocket, as opposed to coming in and having a couple weeks. I mean, if you're hired as a general manager, normally you're like, all right, I'm here. And now down to the Senior Bowl you go, and you're into the draft season, and you're into free agency, and you're meeting with agents and everything within just a few weeks. This gives him a lot more time. Purple Kool-Aid, love JJ, but you could get young talent, and that pick haul for him, you better run to the league office phone. Yeah, I mean, with McCarthy, oh, you mean Jefferson. Are you talking about Jefferson, or are you talking about McCarthy? Because there's been a lot of talk about, would they trade McCarthy? But if you're talking about Justin Jefferson, at this moment, I would not trade Justin Jefferson for another decent wide receiver and a couple of draft picks. I think that everyone needs to be reminded of how good Justin Jefferson really is. We are not that far separated from it, but our brains don't work that way. It works what's the last thing we saw? Well, it was only okay. Trade him. I think after this year, you might feel a lot differently. That's somebody that you want to be your Larry Fitzgerald. You want to go to the Hall of Fame with your team. You want him to go through thick and thin. Like Larry Fitzgerald was through some of the worst seasons in Arizona, and then he was in the Super Bowl. And if you're the Vikings, you want the same thing with Justin Jefferson. Myles Garrett gets traded because Myles Garrett, his team is garbage. And they've been garbage forever, but they're still garbage. This is not a team that is at all in any way, shape, or form a serious contender. So flip him for the best you can, because you're not really that close. You're still 2 years away from being even decent if you're the Cleveland Browns. That's when you do it. I don't see the Vikings being in that spot. Now, when it comes to the A.J. Brown trade, if Jefferson became very disgruntled with the team and things looked pretty bleak, and Kyler goes, 4-8 before being benched for McCarthy, who doesn't do much the rest of the way, and it's all a disaster, and Jefferson's demanding out and won't sign an extension, then yeah, like you might be looking at that, having that conversation, and potentially you might have to do it if you feel like you got to trade for so much draft capital on the table, and that's the only way you're going to get back to the top. But I still don't see it. I think that it would have to be going so wrong for Justin Jefferson to be traded, and I don't think the Wilfs would want him to go. I think they would do everything they possibly could. So I don't know. That feels very far-fetched, but maybe it did to Cleveland Browns fans last year. Joker, amazing move for the Rams. Feel a lot better for the Browns if they weren't the Browns. Yeah, I agree with that. Yeah, reputation matters. Purple Kool-Aid, top paid receivers don't usually lead to championships. I don't think that that's true. Anytime someone tells me that thing X doesn't win a championship, I'm like, it's really not that hard for me to find examples, right? Like, what was Cooper Kupp's contract situation when they won the Super Bowl? AJ Brown, when they won the Super Bowl, was making a ton of money, wasn't he? Right? That was why he got traded to Philadelphia, to make, right, a ton of money. So I'm not into, well, you can't do this with that. You can't pay a quarterback, or you never win. And then teams did it. Stafford did it, and Darnold did it, and Hurts did it. Okay. And Mahomes, but even you can't sign a middling quarterback. And Darnold is still, in my opinion, a top 10 QB because of the last 2 seasons, but he's not Mahomes and he's not Josh Allen, but he was paid and he won. I don't think any absolutes. I would just never buy into any absolutes. I was talking to my wife about this the other day, about how when I was growing up, there was this, well, you can't win with a scrambling quarterback. You can't win with somebody who scrambles all over the place. You can't win a Super Bowl, even though Steve Young had. But I think that was more directed at a certain type of person who scrambled around. And Steve McNair was like this close to doing it. And then Patrick Mahomes comes around. Everyone's like, what we need is these scrambling quarterbacks. It's like nothing. The whole conversation, it came up because we were talking about the NBA. And there's this whole thing of, well, you can't win if you have a small guy as your best player and Jalen Brunson. Well, he's in the finals, so sometimes you can. It depends on a lot of different stuff. Can't win a Super Bowl with a running quarterback, and then Jalen Hurts wins a Super Bowl. On to the next thing. Can't pay a receiver, but there's plenty of examples of that where expensive wide receivers have made and won the Super Bowl. And if not for that one throw by Eli Manning to, was it Mario Manningham? Randy Moss would have caught the game-winning touchdown in the Super Bowl for the Patriots. So I don't know. That was because I used to hear that a lot. It was like, well, the Patriots win Super Bowls with nobody as receivers, so you can't have Terrell Owens or Randy Moss. It was like, I don't think it works that way. Kerpluppy, the only loser of the trade is Verse. He's got to look at the organization and think, Myles effing Garrett couldn't help this trash heap win. Poor guy. Every team, no matter how bad, is always a quarterback away. But in their case, I do agree with you that is going to be a long year for Jared Verse. No question about it. Evans says Vikings sign Verse in 3 years because no way he signs back with the Browns. You can never look 3 years ahead. Look how bad Chicago looked 3 years ago. There are teams all the time that are changing from horrific to really good. Detroit is a good example of that. Detroit was the armpit of the NFL for a very, very long time. And now they're this consistent winning team under Dan Campbell. Things change a lot. Also, players usually take the money with their hometown team rather than hitting free agency because they don't want to get franchise tagged, and it's the best financial option for them. Sometimes if they're planning on being there a long time, they settle down with their families and they want to keep playing for the team. So I don't know. You can't look that far ahead, but if they end up losing Jared Verse to free agency eventually, then that won't look so great. Son of Beavers, Jefferson is happy here and Garrett wanted to be somewhere not named Cleveland. They're very different organizations. But there is a standard for Justin Jefferson that one of the reasons you get Kyler Murray is to uphold that standard of performance that he's had over his career. I think he's frustrated by a lot of the ups and downs and changes at quarterback and then, not winning in the playoffs. He's a guy that absolutely wants to win in the postseason. So I can't entirely count it out. This is a huge year for Justin Jefferson, and the trades of guys like this, these are Justin Jefferson level players. A.J. Brown's a huge superstar. Myles Garrett is the biggest superstar on the defensive side, not named Micah Parsons, but they're like 1-1A. So, and Micah Parsons was traded last year. Like, this level of player does get traded now. I don't think that happened that much in the last maybe 10 years. Before 2 or 3 years ago, or the last 5 years. It feels like these guys, Tyreek Hill, have been moved a lot more as everyone just works on timelines all the time. And you do get bit by the salary cap, but it's usually just if a team, it's usually the structure that's causing it. Is Jefferson's contract is structured to be cheaper at the beginning and then get progressively more expensive. But once it gets progressively expensive to a certain point, you just do an extension. That's the plan. That's why Joe Burrow this year, it's huge for him. Because if Joe Burrow doesn't like Cincinnati, then he can say, I'm not doing an extension with you guys. And that's why Kyler Murray is here, my friends. You hear all sorts of things. Well, Kyler Murray is here because Jacoby Brissett was better. I mean, crack is fine if that's what you're doing to come up with that take, but it's probably not accurate. What really happened with Kyler Murray is they get to a point where he's not going to sign an extension there because that organization is bad and the relationships are burned to dust by the owner who decided to fire the coach that he liked after having to play a backup quarterback and a bad roster the entire year. So then he's not going to sign an extension and the team goes, well, then our only option is to just sit here with an insane salary cap hit. So why not just let him go, right, and start anew? That's what happened with Murray. That's what happened with a lot of these guys that are getting moved. So tying that to Justin Jefferson, Jefferson's in that spot. Yes, they can restructure, but eventually you run out of the restructures and you get to a point where it's not even helping you that much. He's still going to be super expensive and he's not signing an extension. It's time to move on. So that's why this year is very, very important for the Vikings and Jefferson. Steven, how old will Verse be for his second contract? Came out as an older prospect. Little back of the napkin math. Came out at 24, so 25 now. And with 2 years left on the rookie contract, 26, 27. So yeah, his second contract will be like 28, I think. And usually these guys are good through like 32 or more, when they're some of the best. Jay, the Vikings are going to have the press conference with Nolan Teasley on Wednesday, 10 o'clock, and Purple Insider will be in attendance for sure. Joker wants Max Crosby for the 2027 first and second. Man, I don't think so. That just doesn't make a lot of sense because with those injury issues, I just can't buy in. Jay, we have 14 free agents. Who will Teasley, do you think he will re-sign? Trying to guess right now is a little bit tricky because we need to know how they play. Who will he re-sign right away? That's a conversation that they need to have pretty soon. You don't have to do a Blake Cashman extension or whatever else, which I was told the other day that Cashman was not missing OTA practice for any contract-related reasons, just so we know that last week. But when it comes to Brian O'Neill, I think that might be a priority to start. Blake Cashman would be a priority to start. If you want to have those veteran presence guys there for a longer period of time, for a couple more seasons, then maybe you get into that. I personally think that the first person that they should go to with a potential contract extension is Isaiah Rodgers, because they have built during Brian Flores through free agency with these cornerbacks. And I think they really hit on Isaiah Rodgers. He was not a megastar, but we just don't see that a lot anymore, where you have one guy that, man, he's going to lock up everybody. How are they even going to play against them? It's really, does a guy fit within a system, and is he a playmaker? And I think Isaiah Rodgers was both of those things last year. He's going to make, I think, 9 on the salary cap this year. You could lower that a little bit if you needed to. But if you go into free agency, I mean, to get a corner of this caliber, you're probably talking about $15+ million or more if they're even available for the way that he played. And basically, this is a guy coming off of a gambling-related suspension for a year that was a backup on a Super Bowl winning team, but played really, really well when he was in. The Vikings go out and get a steal, but it's not going to be a steal next time. So can you get him extended now would be a question. But I thought they don't have to do anything. I mean, they really don't. They can sit, and this is the advantage that Teasley has. He can sit and watch. He can go to every training camp practice and see how he feels about the roster, and he can start to get to know everybody and everybody's opinions and everything else on everything across the roster, but he doesn't have to figure it out today. He can watch them play an entire season and then make decisions on those free agents. Skull Shadow, the Travis Hunter trade and picks show the insurmountable difference between the NFL and college when trying to play two positions. Oh yeah, I mean that. I was interested. I was very interested because I really like watching Travis Hunter play. And the first time I saw him play wide receiver, I was like, nope, no. There are guys who are spending every single second of their life trying to become great wide receivers. And the idea that you could do both, it's just, for someone who's also pretty slight, but his route running doesn't look like an NFL wide receiver. He looks like he's really great at jump balls, but that's not going to do you a whole lot when he's not the tallest guy. He should play. He's a great corner. I think he's a legitimately great corner talent. Just play him there. Maybe every once in a while you throw him in for a trick play, but the idea he was going to, I mean, and their GM sounded like kind of a nutcase when he talked about this, like he's going to reinvent football. I mean, I don't know. I see Shohei Ohtani do it. If any of you softball fans watch the softball tournament, Jordy Fromm from Nebraska was a hitter and a pitcher and unbelievable at both. So yeah, there's that. But you know what doesn't happen in baseball is anyone murders you. That does happen in football where you get banged up and there's a physical violence to that. And just because Deion Sanders did it for one season in 1996 doesn't mean that someone else way, way later can. If you go back and watch what that looks like, it's different than football looks now. And it was more violent then, but I mean, the speed that they play at now, it's definitely different than it was back in 1996. So I think that turns out to be kind of a bad trade for Jacksonville because they gave up a lot. Axton, my opinion is that Cleveland slightly has the edge in this transaction. My reasoning is because everything hinges on Matthew Stafford staying healthy. If he gets injured, their odds go out the window. I think that is a very fair analysis. This is why it's called going full Rams, because the last time the Rams did this, I said, I'm betting against them. I just don't think it's going to work. I think that they will get to the first round of the playoffs and they'll lose and everyone will say, what did we do? And they were this close to that happening several times in their run. The Tampa Bay Bucks almost came back in that game, and Tom Brady almost ended the full Rams 2021 in, the divisional round of that playoffs. But, it didn't happen. They got the result that they were looking for, but it shows you the razor thin margin of a move like this. When you give up a young player who had 80 pressures last year in Jared Verse and 3 draft picks, if you're right, if Matthew Stafford halfway through the season tears his elbow, what then? I mean, you could probably still be competitive and maybe have a chance to win in the playoffs if Ty Simpson is good, but I mean, that's a big ask. So there's way more risk involved. The problem is it's a lot easier to win a trade when you are garbage, like the Cleveland Browns, than it is when you're actually the good team, right? It's way easier to be the team giving away the great player and people saying, well, they won the trade. This went back to, I remember thinking this with the Chicago Bears trading for, Khalil Mack. And I thought that the Raiders did really well in that trade. But at the end of the day, you don't have Khalil Mack. So you didn't do that great. I mean, it's nice. You get the draft capital and everything else, but it's a lot easier to be giving away the all-time great player than it is to be the team who has to make that decision to go do it. And because there's only ever one winner, then, it's if it doesn't work out, you don't win the Super Bowl and you lose in the divisional round on a field goal or a punt return or something, well, then you failed. Whereas Cleveland is like, oh, we got draft picks and this trade will be helping us for years and everything else. It's way easier to be the crappy team in moves like this. Skull Shadow Teasley will trade McCarthy and Addison 1 year from now. Addison, I have a tough time seeing them trading unless he underperforms. But as long as he performs, and the other part is a big element too, the off the field for sure is a part of it. But that's where, $19 million or $18 million on the 5th-year option is pretty reasonable for a wide receiver. I mean, they could play it out like that and just see how it works out for even 2 more years. They could also have him not be in a good place with the team and make that trade. So I don't want to entirely count that out. But man, like KOC's love for Jordan Addison, that runs deep. Melkill, who wants McCarthy, 0. That's how many. At this moment, that's probably right. Now, if a team were to be going along in training camp and then all of a sudden their quarterback tears their ACL and they call up the Vikings and say, hey, how about, a 2nd round pick for JJ McCarthy? I think that's rich, but let's just say out of desperation, and he's not happy and he hasn't played well in camp or whatever it might be, then yeah, you could see that. We're a far way away. And the Vikings also, the reality is with JJ McCarthy is he has been in games where he's played well enough to win. And if we go through all the games he played last year, what percentage was that? Well enough to win in Chicago-ish. Took a crazy comeback, but we'll give him that one. Definitely not Atlanta. And then comes back, played well enough to win against the Detroit Lions. Definitely not for the next couple of games against Baltimore and Chicago and Green Bay. And then played well enough to win at the end of the season for a couple games against Dallas. I would not say the Giants because he didn't play the whole game and it wasn't that great in the first half, but Washington as well. So what's that? I mean, that's about half of the games that he played well enough to have his team potentially win. If you're in the Vikings position, giving that away for a draft pick might be the right move if he's just miserable and it's like uncomfortable and you're just done. All right, okay. And he's not performing. Okay, I get it. But knowing that Kyler Murray has been banged up in his past and you have someone who is a coin flip to be able to help you potentially win games if you play well enough on defense, run the ball well enough, catch the football, you usually would want to keep that rather than giving that away unless someone really makes it worth your while. Joker said the trade was as good as you can hope for from the Browns, but I don't trust them for some reason, for obvious reasons. Steven, the great teams seem to trade for great players a year early rather than a year late. I mean, the Vikings seem to trade away players. Well, the Vikings, in terms of trades, I mean, yes, if you're referring to the Chris Herndon trade, that was a year late. No question about it. Trades are all about, opportunity number one, and then knowing when it's the right time to do that. And then someone has to be available. I mean, this is the confluence of events here. I mean, the Rams having Myles Garrett come available is already preposterous enough. I think in the future, though, that this is going to happen more often. 2 in one day is insane. These are 2 all-pro caliber players. One of them is an all-timer. The other one's been really, really darn good in his career and has had a lot of success in the same day. Tyreek Hill also got traded. That's an elite player. Bradley Chubb was playing really well for the Denver Broncos when he gets traded. There's a lot of players who have been moved that are on the elite side. So you have to pick when is the right time to do it. And I think, the Vikings going into free agency and what they were looking for last year, they did not make the big trade. This even goes for Dexter Lawrence. That's another elite player. They didn't make the big trade last year. Instead, they decided to make the big signings, which are a little bit on the different side from this. Because if someone is a free agent, that means that their team just straight up let them go for a reason more likely than not and didn't want to pay them. So if someone's not getting paid by their team, it may be because they didn't like how the performance was going, right? Because if you want to find the cap space, you usually can. So when Allen is cut, when Hargrave is cut, there's a reason for that. They could still play, but they were not what they used to be. In trades for top players, that's different because Myles Garrett is still playing at a ridiculously high level. So there's really no big risk involved. Where I think free agency is at its best and where Seattle did a good job with it and the Vikings have as well at times is when you get a Blake Cashman, where it's somebody that the team had for 1 year and was pretty good, but hadn't done it before. So they decide, we just can't afford his price. And then you get a steal. Or Isaiah Rodgers. Hey, this guy was a backup, but your team really likes him. Those have been their best types of moves. It's rarely superstars who end up in free agency. So you do have to decide when the right time to make the trades for them are. Jay says, why did the Wilfs not promote Rob to president of Vikings operations? I hope they gave him a raise. Maybe they did. I don't know about that. But when it comes to keeping the same position, I think there's an adjustment there, or at least it seems like there is, of how the power is going to be distributed. President would have indicated that he was the prime decision maker, which actually is a real thing that matters. Teasley is going to be considered the prime decision maker. So there is in the NFL, there is a name for it. So Matt Ryan is that in Atlanta. Matt Ryan is the prime. I think it's called the prime or whatever it is, the number one guy. And they have a label. So Teasley is that here. If they had made him president, then it would have probably been Rob. Steven, I think I did give a FanDuel question of the day, and it was that the Rams are now. Yes, I did, because earlier I did an emergency podcast breaking this down, and I said to Sam Brookhouse of Sumer Sports, who was on the show with me, I said, Rams are the field. That on FanDuel, the Rams are plus 550 to win the Super Bowl. That's almost twice as good of odds as anybody else right now. Rams are the field. Which are you taking? Was the FanDuel question of the day. But thanks for your reminder. Evan, you think Verse is asking Crosby how to fail physical? Oh, that's funny. Dirty Mike, Chris Herndon, Adam Thielen got a clench as a Vikings fan at the end of training camp. Dude, yeah, look, you're exactly right about that. That some of their worst trades under Spielman and then clearly the Thielen did come at the end of training camp. So you do have to be careful with that. If someone's getting rid of somebody, but Gilmore is an example of a free agent who hung around and just didn't want to go to training camp and then it worked out. I got the sense that Carson Wentz was the same story. Mike, I think that Teasley should lay down the law. No draft capital goes out the door under any circumstance. That would indicate the shift I am hoping for. I think that it's not just Teasley, but also Rob Brzezinski should have that as well. because you can always talk yourself into, hey, what if we just make this one move? We got this many wins. And if we just get this one more guy, but something that the markets are always very smart about, and the gambling people, the Vegas odds makers, is they understand what moves the needle and what doesn't. So a Myles Garrett, a Micah Parsons, like, yes, that's the level of, if they're playing in a game, that number's moving. And if they're not playing in a game, that number's moving. But if the Vikings, for example, had moved Blake Brandel to left tackle in 2024, and I don't think this was the worst move in the world. I understood why they did it. But if they just moved him to left tackle and brought back Ed Ingram and had Dalton Reisner play guard, are the results different? I mean, probably not, right? Like, Brandel could handle himself a little bit at tackle. Cam Robinson turned out to be very bad, very costly as they went down the stretch, and you gave up draft capital for it. And you gave up the one that is crazy to me is Jalen Reagor. And it's not much, but it's like you traded something for Jalen Reagor. So that's the type of move that they need to stop doing. And they also need to have a sense for, and this is where Rob did a great job with the Jonathan Grenard trade. I don't love it that Jonathan Grenard is not here, but if you're going to do it, draft capital, top 100 picks, cap space, like getting those things. And I keep saying stockpiling because it's the right word, just hoarding as much of that capital as you can. And sometimes, yes, you have to make a move. And sometimes an opportunity comes your way where you're like, this is it. Got to make this move. Go for it. But it's rare that those moves are truly justified. And those picks, you just need as many shots at that as you possibly can. Jay says, I think the Vikings need to save cap space for next year's free agents and maybe re-signing Coller. Yep, I agree with that. And that's why you can't do a bunch of everyone, extend everyone, but you also can do some extensions that you know are going to fit into the future. Rach said, I noticed JJ speaking about the team as if it was somehow separate from himself. I wonder if his camp wants a trade if he doesn't become the starter. I again, don't want to put words in his mouth, but him talking about it, saying the organization, the coaches, not like in any sort of personal way, did feel very much like what you're talking about. And I mean, nobody knows how this thing's going to play out with JJ McCarthy, but he's certainly, and I saw Dan Patrick was talking about this as well. I mean, he certainly put the target on his back when he talked the way that he did. And was he trying to send a message to the team about, how he feels about the entire situation, or was he just being that way in front of us to show that he's mad at us? Seen that before. Like, it was really hard to interpret, but one thing that you were sure about is that there's a way that people usually go about that for a reason, because you're part of a team. They're paying you. You're there to help the franchise win until you're not. So when you're talking about it as if it's just like he's over there, I'm over here, the organization, the coaches, whatever, like that doesn't sound like somebody who is saying, I'm going to do everything I can to help us win because this is the team that I play for that pays me, right? So it just didn't come across. If he was aiming for something else, it didn't come across. Joker says the Rams went full Rams and still rebuilt through the draft. Can we do that? Or are they just way better at us? Well, they are really exceptional at that. And it did take time. And look, I just think that it's better to wait on that and see. When the Rams went full Rams, remember, they did not do it all in one fell swoop. I mean, they actually made moves. Wasn't the Von Miller trade an in-season trade? The Vikings can wait to see how good they are and then make a decision. I'm trying to think about, like, was it Von Miller who was the one that they made the big trade for in season? I feel like it was. And if maybe there was other moves that happened in the middle of that season. So you can, I'm not like, look, when you say, and you're banging the drum for this, and I love that you're saying, hey, like, look, this team's really good and whatever. I know the Rams just did this, but why not make a big move? I could only see it if things are going really, really well for them and then they decide it's time to go. But even then, that is extremely, extremely risky toward the future because like I was just talking about, if you make that big move and then Kyler rolls an ankle in the wild card round, then what? Then you've given up a first round draft pick. If it's a multi-year move, I could see. But even then, you got to get to a point through the draft where you can afford this. That's the biggest thing for me. The Seahawks could afford Leonard Williams because they built through the draft. The Vikings are just not in a spot right now. RZ 0007 says, speaking of the D-line, what are your thoughts on the edge room? So I'm actually really intrigued by how they're going to use Ty Ingram-Dawkins. If they are going to use Ingram-Dawkins as an outside linebacker, I'm really interested in that because I've always seen a lot of like Jihad Ward in his game. It's like a bigger guy, like 275 pounds. He's a good athlete and like maybe is not ever going to be the most refined guy, but that athleticism alone and the size and the power and the speed, he could be very interesting in a little more space rather than in a phone booth inside. And I like Elijah Williams as a big giant dude as more of a 3-4 defensive end than I do Ingram-Dawkins. So I like that. I'm a little bit interested in Ches Chambliss. I'm a little bit interested in Bo Richter and whoever else they bring in and undrafted free agents. But I think it needs a veteran. I think it needs a little bit of, you can rely on this person behind Andrew Van Ginkel and Dallas Turner. No one's going to take Van Ginkel's spot. And I don't see Golday right away as being able to do that. So I think you need one other person that you could say, all right, if this guy goes down, we for sure know that we have player X. And I do think that something will happen at some point. TSB, curious about the safety room. Is there a competition happening? Is Theo the starter? Does Jacoby Thomas have a chance? Does Jay Ward exist? Feels like Metellus is the only sure thing right now. So at least my first impression, and thank you for that question. My first impression was that Josh Metellus and Theo Jackson are going to be the traditional safeties. And by traditional, there's nothing super traditional about what Brian Flores does. So Metellus, I'm sure, would still be moving around a lot, but Jay Ward is going to kind of shift into a big nickel Josh Metellus position. That makes the most sense because Jay did make a very positive impression on me last year. His physical play, he plays with conviction, like downhill tackling, aggressiveness. You know, I like to see that. I think Theo can take another step from last year. It wasn't atrocious. There were just some times where, dude, you got to plug a hole in the run or run down a screen, or this is not going to be good for you. I also thought there was a lack of opportunity because they weren't winning a lot. So how often did Theo Jackson get to just make a play when a team was desperately throwing downfield? That didn't happen much. So that's where they're at right now. I don't know that Jacoby Thomas has a great chance over guys who have been in this defense for years. I mean, maybe. If it really clicked, I think right now he's depth, and it depends on Harry coming back. I could also see one more guy. I mean, Donovan Wilson is someone that I've been kind of interested in. Like, what is his plan? He's 31 years old. He's played a long time for Dallas, but he's been a good player at times in his career. Could you add one more if Harrison Smith is not coming back? And maybe they're kind of just holding out to see that. Mike says the Rams are a better organization. We can't hope to just copy them. Well, I mean, the Seahawks, which is where you're getting your new GM, were able to beat them. So that's kind of what you're trying to emulate in a lot of ways, which is that if you can solidify your quarterback position and really put all of your emphasis on drafting and get a lot of draft picks. And I know it's the bleep them picks, but they had a lot of picks in the other rounds, not just, they did trade first rounders, but they had a lot of picks in other rounds. And Seattle had a ton of picks. Seattle had 14 top 100 picks since 2022. The Vikings had 8. I mean, that's 6 more players in the top 100 of the draft. That's a lot. So if that's how you're going to do it, look, this is what everyone's trying to do, is slay the dragon. So they went out and got somebody from a team that slayed the dragon. So you can be. They're not that far. They're not that far away from organizational, ownership and functionality and stuff like that. They're not that far away. Jeremy, can we trade McCarthy to the Browns for the Rams first round pick? Probably not. John says, considering our owner's overall track record, I'm very impressed they decided to go completely opposite of nepotism. I mean, I don't think hiring someone who worked here for years before would be like nepotism. I think of that as just someone who worked the way up your ladder instead of another team's ladder. But I get what you're saying. Teasley and the supporting cast needs to perform. Yeah, I mean, like, I agree with you in general that going on the outside and then pairing it with the people who are here says to me that the Wilfs understand that you don't need to just blow up this entire thing. You don't need to fire everyone and get rid of everything. What you need to do is find someone with a fresh approach, and you need to nail player evaluation in the draft. And this is a person that has been a major focus of his for the last several years since being bumped up to assistant general manager. So that's really what you're aiming for, is building a staff of evaluators that can hit more than they miss. And then the other stuff has been good. Like, Rob's been good at his job. Kevin O'Connell largely has been good at his job. So it's not like you need everything to change with Nolan Teasley. Devin says McCarthy's value is at its lowest right now. Let him finish a few games for Kyler efficiently and maybe trade him next offseason. Yeah, it's possible. JP, and look, I mean, with JJ, I'm just not in a hurry to do it because I want to wait and see if Kyler is healthy long-term. And also, I wouldn't completely count it out. As long as he has the right attitude behind the scenes, it doesn't really matter what he says to us. That was my biggest question is this how you're approaching this? Are you approaching this from a position of like humility and understanding of how far you have to go to be even as good as Kyler Murray? Or are you approaching this as, no, I'm already great and nothing you could tell me matters? You'd be shocked how many athletes are like that. So I don't know if JJ is. He's never come across that way. But if he is, well, then he's probably not going to get a lot better. But I'm willing to wait and see rather than, trading him after one press conference. JP, if Kyler proves to be that he's our franchise quarterback, do you see us trading a third for Devon Achane? Achane just signed a big extension with Miami, so I don't think that they're going to trade. Maybe someday at some point, but I don't think they're going to trade him right away. What I do see is if Kyler locks himself into being the franchise quarterback this year, if he goes 11-6 and he is a top 10 quarterback-ish, top 12, somewhere in that range. Let's say they either win a playoff game or they're very close or whatever it might be. And they say, all right, we're going to sign you to a Daniel Jones type extension, a Sam Darnold type extension, whatever it's going to be, right? Something like that. Then your goal becomes to competitively rebuild, but largely through the draft. And keep as much of this team together as you can, but really put an emphasis on refreshing it around Kyler Murray and then seeing where this takes you. And then when the moment strikes, that's when you make big trades. So I think that's kind of the goal. You're right. Yes. Blake Cashman just had a baby. Yep. So that's why he wasn't there. Not demanding a trade either. Delton says, tuning in to hear a new narrative of McCarthy because we have a new GM, not this BS smear campaign. Buddy, you're in the wrong comment section. You're in the wrong comment section. That's all I can say. That's all I could say. It's the wrong comment section. This is the comment section that belongs to the person that wrote a book called Football is a Numbers Game. This is the reporter. This is went to college to be a reporter. It's all objective here, my friend. It's all the facts. That's what we go on. We don't go on smear campaigns. We don't go on hyperbole. We don't go on vibes. We go on facts. And the fact of the matter is the Minnesota Vikings did not like their quarterback play last year. They felt that if they had had even reasonably good quarterback play, that they would have been a legitimate contender last season. So they went and got the best, number one by far, a mile, quarterback who was available to be their starter. That's just the reality, man. And if JJ McCarthy had come to the podium and he had said, look, I'm trying to learn everything I can from Kyler Murray. I want to do the best I can for this coaching staff to prove that I belong out there. But no matter what happens, even if I'm the backup quarterback, I'm giving 100% every single week because I want to win a championship with this team. I'm going to do the absolute best I can, bring the best attitude to work every single day. If he said that, I would have come back and I would have sat down here and said, That was really good. And it shows the right attitude, and because you're going to need that if you're going to succeed. He didn't do that. I can't change that. I can't change 12 interceptions to only 11 touchdowns. I can't change his 42nd ranked quarterback rating. I can't do it. I can't change his 27 sacks. Those all happened on the field. Purple Insider can't change the facts. We can only analyze them. So smear campaign, call whatever the hell you want. It's just the truth of the matter, man. Kyler Murray's your quarterback. And it's on J.J. McCarthy to prove that there's a different narrative. It's, you say narrative as if it's like made up. It's not made up that they went out and got a really, really darn good quarterback who was drafted number 1 and has been a Pro Bowler and has played very well at times in his career. That's not made up, man. That's not shifted or shaped or anything. That's just the fact of the matter. And if you don't like the facts, well, that's not my problem. Those are the facts. Skull Shadow says, can you ask Teasley after all the collaboration who has the final call? I'm sure someone will. It's pretty rare that we actually get an answer on that, and I'm sure we won't. And I respect the fact that Rob Brzezinski did give us an answer on that at the NFL Combine. But usually we don't get an answer unless someone finds out, and maybe someone will find out. But normally in a press conference, that's going to be asked about. I guarantee you that's going to be asked about. It's just the Purple Insider. I'm probably not going to be the one to ask that question. Because if I get one, I want to find out about, inside baseball stuff. So that's what I'm going to try for if I get a chance. But Ty says Vikes are years away from a move like this. To me, it shows how much the team has to catch up. I think that wouldn't have been true had JJ McCarthy worked out. If McCarthy had worked out, they would have extended Jonathan Grenard and been looking to try to make a move like this. If he was great, they'd be in this market for sure. So it's funny about how it works out, like how, thin the margins are and how if one thing changes, then everything is different. But truly, if JJ McCarthy had been good, they're probably having conversations with the Cleveland Browns in the same way that the Rams did, because they have a good team around them. Caciators, it's Thursday is the practice availability, Thursday for OTAs. Jay says Vikings are in a great spot this year. If you were Teasley, what is the one thing you would change before the 2026 season starts? Well, yeah, I mean, in terms of like his front office, you mentioned a new AGM. Yeah, that's probably going to happen. But the one thing I would change like on the field is I probably wouldn't change anything on the field before the end of training camp, except for maybe getting like one extra free agent depth player. But I would want to see everything with my own eyes. If I was coming in, I would want to, and I'm sure I'd have an impression of, hey, what this looks like and everything else. But I would want to see everything for the first time like it's fresh. And I would want to get a full impression of every single player, every single situation, everyone in the front office before I started shuffling things around. And since we know that moves can be made at any time of year, I think I'd have time to be able to do that. Probably, extensions. That the tough part is I'd love to give extensions to veteran players, but also I'd rather, as a new GM, I'd rather just watch them play for a year and then decide what I want to do. So like taking the time, that's what I would do. Hunter, do we think Hitman is done? No idea. It seems that way, but he could come back at any time. You don't have to like sign your death papers or whatever that you're never playing again. You don't have to do that. You don't have to announce you're retiring. So he might just be waiting to see, or waiting until they got June 1st cap space. I don't know, but I wish I had an answer on that, but I really don't. And, Harrison is not the type of guy who's going to leak it out to reporters. Here's what I'm thinking. That's not him. That is definitely not him. So we'll see. I mean, if he's coming back, it'll come out through his agent, I'm sure, through certain people. But in terms of like, hey, Matt, here's what I'm thinking. He's never been that guy for, with any of us. So let's see. Let me get a couple more, and then I'm going to go watch my wife call some basketball for the Minnesota Lynx. Evan, if you're the Seahawks, are you calling the Raiders about Crosby? Well, they did lose Boye Mafe, and they do have cap space. So I think what you're doing with Seattle, this is a very rare situation where two of these guys get traded on June 1st. I think that what will probably happen is it'll play out with Max Crosby into the season. If the Raiders are terrible, then yeah, they should be looking to trade him in the season. Like every situation kind of has its own thing. But Seattle, they have some cap space. So they made moves last year to get better. Even at the trade deadline, I would not be shocked at all if they get into the season and try to take every opportunity they can. These two teams are all in. They are all in. Skull Shadow, if this season goes south in 2026 and KOC doesn't get to the playoffs again, do you think the Vikings ownership lets Teasley overhaul the team and get a coach and quarterback he believes in? It's a great question. It's a great question. I do not know. The way that this thing is being laid out right now, the way that it's being presented, as if they want for a long period of time, Teasley, KOC, and Rob Brzezinski to be making the calls. And I have never gotten the sense that the ownership of this team feels like they are judging KOC minute to minute, like maybe you would if it was Mike Zimmer and the internal stuff was a disaster. It has felt much more like they picked KOC over Kwesi when there was this enormous disaster because they like the way that KOC has run the culture. And when you're consistently getting voted at the top of the league by the players, I think they like that a lot. And when you go 4-8 and turn it around, and at the end of the year, you know, you're over 500, I think that they appreciate that too for KOC. But you know what? If your situation plays out and they win 7 games, there might be a decision there to be made. Like Teasley now has, despite the fact that there's a contract extension and everything else for KOC, Teasley now has like I don't want to call it the upper hand, but like he's the new guy. He's the one with the freshest eyes on the franchise. So I never want to say never to any of these things. I just don't ever get that sense that, they brought in Teasley to decide on KOC in 1 year and then move him out. Cause I think ownership wants KOC to be here long-term. JP, we can't compete with the Rams specifically by going rogue. The most insane thing we could do is trade a third for someone. Trading first and seconds would be falling into the trap it's hard to get out of. Yeah, I mean, Joker says, are we as good as the Rams? No, it's worth a shot to go all in on these. You can win one game in the playoffs against them. I understand where you're coming from is like, hey man, you got a good team, but I would much rather want to see how it plays out first. That's my thing is like, I don't want to totally dismiss what you're saying because they might do it, but let's see how it plays out in the first number of weeks over the season to get a sense of how good this team is before you just make a giant move. And I really do want them to build through the draft over multiple years. The only reason the Rams are in position to do this is Matthew Stafford and building through the draft. Jay, do you think Teasley will convince KOC one of the missing pieces is a star running back? That is something that for sure the Seattle Seahawks believe in. They spent a first-round draft pick. They spent a high pick on Ken Walker. I could see that being into the future. Yeah. I mean, right now they have a good running back in Jordan Mason. I think he's actually a little underappreciated for how good he was last year. But running is something that they appear to be emphasizing more with their hires and their moves with the coaching staff. But it's probably going to be something that the GM believes in because, man, did he see it with Seattle. What's the first question for the new general manager? How I decide? Well, I don't know what the first person's going to ask. I mean, you never know. Like there's a lot of people in a room at that point. How I decide? I mean, I usually have a sense going in. I mean, this is all I do all day long is write about the team, talk about the team with you guys. And when I'm not writing or talking, I'm usually talking to my friends while we're playing golf about the team anyway. So I'll have a pretty good idea in any press conference what is on my mind, but usually it's what I think that the audience can get something out of. Like I'm looking for, when I'm talking about how I decide, it's what insight could I get? So rather than saying, do you have final say and just knowing that there's not going to be an answer there, I would much rather say, when you were with Seattle and you oversaw the research and analytics department and elements of the scouting, how did you weigh those things together? Because I feel like that could offer some insight in just to how the guy thinks. That's what I'm looking for. You know, with KOC, sometimes it's who's practicing today kind of thing, but usually it's the same sort of story for any of the coaches or whatever else. It's just who can tell me something interesting. And what you're looking for is how can I get insight that we might be able to use on the show for a conversation that will just learn us something pretty interesting, because these guys know more about football than all of us combined. So yeah, I mean, it really depends on the situation. But for a new GM, that would be my first question. If I get one, it's going to be a lot of people, you never know. But I'll probably ask something about that. If someone else asks it, then I'll have my answer anyway. But there's a lot of things about, what it means to him to be here, what he knows about the organization, how he sees final say is what everyone wants to know, but just how he sees the triumvirate or the tricycle of power is really interesting. Right? So there's a lot to be asked. Super Rod says, if the Vikings are trash at the deadline, what do you think the team would do? I hope that Nolan Teasley is given the power to trade away anything that has value. And look, they could do it. I mean, there's Van Ginkel, there's Hawkinson, there's O'Neal, there's Cashman. Like, if they're trash at the deadline, I want to see the owners say, we've made this mistake before, it's time to move on. And I think that's what, Teasley would do. Thank you, Mike. I appreciate you tuning in. Thank you, Jay. Thank you, all of you. It was a really enjoyable show. Appreciate all of the questions, comments, thoughts. Who knew that June 1st would be an exciting day in the National Football League? I didn't expect it. And yet here we are with Myles Garrett on the Rams, A.J. Brown on the Patriots, and the Vikings announcing a new general manager. What a time to be alive. So much to come this week. Sam Monson, already there was a very interesting podcast with Sam Brookhouse breaking down this big trade today. Sam Monson is stopping in tomorrow. And then on Wednesday, 10 o'clock is the press conference. Then Dane Mizutani and I will record a podcast right after. And then you'll hear from us as soon as I get home. And let's see, probably go live Wednesday night to get all of your reactions. And then Thursday, we'll have an OTA practice. And I'm thinking maybe I'll connect, maybe Dane and I will podcast again or somebody out there, and then we'll go live again. And then I will take a nap. So it's going to be a fun week. It's going to be a really fun week in June talking about football. Oh, man, blessed. We are blessed, my friends. Thanks again, everybody, for watching. Really appreciate all of your participation. And if you're just getting to start, watching the show, jump in the comment section. Like, we try to make it very friendly around here about the football talk as best we possibly can. So if you've been lurking, come on in. The water's warm. All right, everybody. We'll talk to you very soon. Go watch the links.